This is Journey to Chinese Fluency podcast, episode number 25.
Embarrassing moment, culture insights, proven methods to achieve Chinese fluency. Skip that learning curve with the Journey to Chinese Fluency podcast. Now, your host, Victor Yang.
Hello everyone, Victor Yang here and welcome to Journey to Chinese Fluency. Today I am joined by Cameron Patterson. Cameron comes from Wales in UK. Apart from English and Chinese, he's also learning Swedish since his girlfriend is from there. Cameron first started learning Chinese 14 years ago, but he has studied it properly for 7 years. Cameron is now 22 years old, living in Lancaster and studying for a master in physics at Lancaster University. Here's an interesting fact about Cameron. He got to perform for the Chinese President Xi Jinping during his state visit to the UK a couple of years ago. Well, that's pretty amazing. 你好, Cameron. Welcome to the show.
你好, Victor.
Are you ready to share with us your journey to Chinese fluency?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. So first of all, tell us a bit about your performance to President Xi Jinping. That's pretty impressive.
Yes, it was very exciting to be asked to do something, a great honor. So it all came about because I was the European champion of the 2015 Chinese bridge competition for foreign college students. It's Chinese proficiency competition. Mm-hmm. And through that, the Confucius Institute and Han Ban sort of knew about my Chinese talent. And because I performed during the opening ceremony for the 1000th Confucius Institute and Confucius Classroom, they invited me to take part and to perform a poem that President Xi actually wrote himself. 念奴教追思教育录. So the poem is about Jiao Yulu, obviously a very famous sort of person in Chinese history.
Yes. Awesome. That's pretty amazing. Well, maybe you can also share with us a little bit more background about yourself.
Yes, of course. So when I was around 8 years old, my parents, my father first moved to China to teach English. And after living here for about half a year to a year, he said to my mother, why don't you bring Cameron out here too? And we can all live in China. And then he can study Chinese from a young age. And it would sort of be beneficial for him to speak Chinese for the future. It's easier to learn languages generally when you're younger, having been immersed in the culture and the language. So they decided to, I was only young, so I didn't really have much say in it, right. But they decided that it would be a good idea, and I definitely think it was.
Yeah, definitely a good idea. So at what age did you start learning?
So it was when I was almost 9 years old. So in about between 2003 and 2004.
I see.
That was when I first came to China, yeah. And I hadn't learned Chinese prior to that.
I see. So once you landed in China, did you go straight to primary school?
Yes, I did. So at the time, my father was teaching in Shanxi province, Datong, and I went to the primary school where he was teaching. So in the mornings, I would go to class, and then after school was over, I would have sort of a private tutor for a couple of hours, just to get my language up to the same standard as the Chinese children my age, because I was in a local school. So usually in most of the schools I went to, I was the only foreigner, if not maybe one of maybe 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. So obviously I was, because it wasn't an international school, I had to have my Chinese at a higher level because everybody around me was from China and studying things in Chinese.
Yeah. How did it go at the beginning? Did you have a hard time understanding everything? And, how did you overcome that?
Yeah, definitely. It was very difficult in the beginning because Chinese it's such a different language. And to be sort of a 9-year-old boy being sent to sort of this crazy, almost alien world from my perspective, where I couldn't understand what anybody was saying sort of out in the world. I couldn't understand what the teachers were saying. I couldn't understand what sort of my classmates were saying. So in the beginning, it was definitely a little difficult to make friends, and it was definitely scary. But I think that everybody always tried to make an effort to help me learn Chinese in the schools, especially my fellow classmates and my teachers. And after about, I think, a year and a half, my Chinese skill sort of was up to the level where I could start communicating. And my mum said, I don't actually remember this very well. She said it was a point where I wouldn't speak any Chinese, and then one day I just suddenly started speaking it.
Right.
So I suppose that's quite interesting. Maybe it's like I had to build up my own confidence to a certain level.
Right. Well, it's interesting you went to China at a very young age. When you were back in the UK, I guess you have friends and you were communicating all in English. And once you landed in China, what happened to you? Like, did you feel comfortable with that, or did you enjoy staying in China? Did you have any struggle mentally?
Yeah, well, there was definitely a cultural aspect to it, a cultural difficulty, because, China, especially thinking back to 2004, where there still weren't that many non-Chinese people living in Chinese cities, especially a small city such as Datong. Maybe if you went to somewhere like Beijing, Shanghai, or Guangzhou, it would be different. Because there were people sort of on the street who, you'd think they had never seen a foreigner before. And they would come up to me. And at the time, I had bright blue eyes and really, really sort of white blonde hair. So I stood out.
Yeah.
And people would come and like rub my skin and pull my hair. And everyone would make such a fuss about you.
Yeah.
And, as a child, that can be quite scary that so many people are paying attention to you. And,
That's true.
Looking at you wherever you go. I did always go back to Britain sort of in the summer holidays.
Right.
So I would get to see my old friends from primary school, the few years that I was in primary school before going to China. But definitely after I left China sort of for good, when I was, later in life to come home to do my high school education.
Right.
I felt like there was, from living in China during my formative years, it definitely had a big impact on my personality. And at that point, it was almost like Britain felt different and strange because I'd spent most of my life living in China. So yeah, that was definitely a big part of it.
How many years did you spend in China?
So about 8 years in total. So I went there when I was around, like I said, just before I was 9. And I left shortly after I was 16. So 7 to 8 years.
Right. Wow. So the whole time you've been in China.
Yeah.
And only now you're in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. And even last year, I went back to China to study in Fudan University for 1 year.
During your study of Chinese in China, did you have any struggle? I mean, in terms of motivation, did you have to motivate yourself, or your parents has been pushing you, or you just, learn it pretty naturally?
I think that when you're sort of thrown in the environment where like not many people speak English and you have to sort of learn Chinese to survive.
Yeah.
I suppose I didn't need so much motivation because you want people to be able to understand you and you want to be able to understand what people are saying to you. So I think in that respect, it's kind of like being thrown in the deep end. You probably don't need much motivation to learn how to swim, which I suppose is a sort of a cliche thing to say, but it definitely is very true.
Well, now please share with us your method of learning Chinese. Well, obviously you were studying in school in the environment. What exactly did you do to actually gain all the foundation, all the basics to be able to communicate with others?
So I get asked this question quite a lot, and the answer I always, I have to think about it. And the answer I always try to give is that you can't be afraid to get things wrong because it's going to happen 100%. Like even now, I still will get things wrong. And it's just very natural. You speak to a Chinese person who's been learning English all their life and they'll still, occasionally make a slip up. I even say things wrong in English sometimes. It's just the way humans are, I suppose. And you have to really get over that. If you say something wrong and somebody corrects you, you can't feel bad. You have to sort of take it on board and learn from that. Because every time somebody corrects you, it's an experience to get better at Chinese. And it shouldn't be something that you should feel sort of put down by. So I think that would be my biggest advice.
Right.
And try to use it as frequently as you can, especially if you're not living in China. You should try to maybe try to find some activities with Chinese communities, maybe in the cities that you're in. I volunteered at the Confucius Institute in Cardiff, where my hometown is. And I also volunteered at the Confucius Institute in Lancaster here because there's one at the university. And it's definitely an excellent way to practice Chinese because every week they have sort of a Chinese corner.
Right.
So definitely try to find ways where you can practice it as much as possible because it doesn't matter how many books you read or how many videos you watch. You have to be in a position where you can speak to somebody from China or who speaks Chinese. Otherwise, when you watch something or read a book, you sometimes can't fix the context. And I feel like it's very important to have that human social interaction to be able to learn it well.
Yeah, definitely. Being immersed in the environment and just talk more and use the vocabulary you have learned, that definitely help you to reinforce into your memory.
Yes, yeah, 100%.
So in terms of listening, speaking, reading, and writing, what would you say is your strength and what is your weakness? Can you share with us on that?
That's a good question, actually. I think probably speaking is definitely my strong suit. Writing probably was up there at some point, but nowadays I find since leaving school, excluding my year in Shanghai last year where I had to write things in Chinese again, most stuff is done on computers and phones nowadays.
Yes.
And you find yourself, typing the pinyin and you recognize the characters and you click on them. But I found sometimes if I go to write an article now by hand or write a letter, I'll be like, I can't exactly remember how this character is written. And then, you look it up and you remember straight away. But I think that's the danger about, smartphones and computers and not handwriting Chinese characters, is that you have a tendency to forget exactly, like you may be able to recognize them, but can you actually reproduce that? I think that's quite a difficult thing. So yes, definitely speaking, because I do a lot of sort of bilingual presenting. So I do speak Chinese a lot. But yeah, maybe writing has gone down a bit since I left.
Sure. Well, in terms of speaking and listening, what exactly did you do to get it to a very high level?
So definitely, like I said, speaking and listening, you should try to practice it as much as you can by conversing with Chinese people. Listening as well, you can sort of try to watch some Chinese TV shows or some sort of Chinese movies. And if you're at sort of the beginner's stage of learning Chinese, of course, you can turn on the English subtitles and then listen to what they're saying and try to, make it out. And then there'll be a point where you realize you don't need sort of the English subtitles anymore. And then you can switch to the Chinese subtitles and then start reading along with them. So that's definitely a good way to learn. I feel like it's something that's overlooked a lot because my parents would be like, why are you watching so much TV? And I'll be like, well, it's still a way to learn, even though it's sort of recreational. I wouldn't recommend that you do your sort of entire Chinese language education by watching TV, but definitely it is a way you can help with the listening if you're not in a position where you can be constantly conversing with Chinese people.
Yeah, being a child in China, I'm just wondering, would that help you in terms of imitating the native speakers, in terms of the pronunciation? Did you find pronunciation difficult?
I didn't find it that difficult, actually. And I think being young was probably a big part of it because, you still haven't sort of formed... to be honest, I don't really know much about sort of the biology of, how vocal cords grow and things like that. But it does always seem to be that you find that children can sort of imitate sounds much better than somebody of an advanced age, because I think you don't have so many sort of preconceptions of how like sounds should sound. So you find something that particularly with the foreigners that I know that study Chinese, my brother, for one, some people have trouble with like yun, like for cloud, like that that sound is something that you find is quite difficult to pronounce for some foreigners.
Right. So you have a brother.
Yes, yeah, I have a brother and a sister.
Wow.
But they're both much older than me. So my sister didn't actually move to China at all because she was already in her sort of late teens, 20s when we moved. So she stayed in Britain to carry on her education. But my brother did move out to China a few years later after we moved. And he lived there up until last year, where he's now moved back to the UK with his son, who's half Chinese.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah. So he's studying in a UK primary school now, my nephew. And he obviously speaks Chinese and English. It's weird because he's my nephew, but because they lived in Jiangsu, he has like a kind of almost a small dialect. And it's very strange to hear that coming out of sort of a young child in Cardiff. Yeah, it's quite fun. Yeah.
Right. So you learned your Chinese in Shanxi Datong, right?
That was kind of the first place I lived, but only for 6 months.
Oh.
I'd say the majority of my time of primary school was spent in Jiangsu, in Lianyungang. And the majority of my junior school years were spent in Guangdong, in Zhanjiang. So we moved
Right.
around quite a bit because every time my parents finished a contract in a school, we moved somewhere different because, you want to see different parts of the country and experience the wide variety of culture and food that China has to offer. So we always tried to go somewhere different every few years.
Right. That's very interesting. So did you get to pick up some of the local dialects?
If I did when I was in primary school, it's all gone now. Definitely. I
Right.
can't remember any of it. Because, in school, you're always supposed to speak Mandarin anyway.
Right.
And the teachers all speak Mandarin. So when I was living in Guangdong, I did start to understand quite a lot of Cantonese. But it's not something I ever learned how to speak because I didn't use it enough, or I didn't
Right.
find that I needed to use it enough for it to be, sort of to pick it up quick enough. And I was only there for about 3 years, so it wasn't something I used often.
I think you have raised a very good point where
Yeah,
it's very important that you have a reason to use the language. If you don't have the reason, if you're not forced to use it, eventually you just won't be using it that much and you'll just forget it, isn't it?
exactly. That's why I think I don't want to sound like I'm putting anybody off learning Chinese, but the best way to learn it is to go and live in China. And that's not to say that if that isn't possible, you shouldn't learn Chinese, because you definitely should. But it is sort of a significantly easier way to do it, because you'll find yourself using it all the time and hearing it all the time, and having actually the need to speak it better. So I think that definitely is a good point, yes.
Yeah, I think especially for children, like let me use this analogy. Children is like electricity, they always take the shortest path. So, like if they can communicate with the easiest language they can use, they'll just use that language.
Yeah.
For example, if they go to school and everybody's speaking English, that's the language they're going to use at home. And if they go to school and everybody's speaking Chinese, then they go home, they will speak Chinese,
Yeah, definitely.
My children now, like, we only speak Mandarin Chinese at home.
Okay.
But I definitely know, like, one day when they go to school, they'll start picking up English, and eventually their English is probably going to be better than their Chinese.
Yeah.
So definitely have to create an environment. So that's very important.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially for children.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what has been your biggest challenge in learning Chinese, and how did you overcome it?
That's an interesting question. I would say the biggest challenge for me, even though I suppose I don't remember it very well, would definitely have been the beginning. Because, I was 9 when I moved, having known sort of no Chinese at all, and having to try to, gain up to the standard of a sort of primary school Chinese student who's been, understanding Chinese from birth, so having listened to it from the parents and things like that. So definitely Chinese school was a big challenge for me, especially the workload. I always tell people in Britain, and they just can't believe it.
Yeah.
When I was in sort of middle school, and you start school at 7 o'clock in the morning, and you do morning exercise, or you do a flag raising ceremony, and then you do morning reading.
Yep.
And then you have classes until 12, and then you have sort of a lunch break and a sleep, and then classes until 5, and then dinner and PE, and then classes until, was it supervised homework until,
Yep.
or even sometimes even classes or revision sessions until sort of 10:30 at night. And that's Monday to Sunday.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people find that like completely crazy. But I definitely think that even though it was quite hard to get used to in the beginning, it definitely helped me build up like good work ethics, which showed when I came back to the UK. And I used to get very angry at my classmates when they'd have like 1 week to do a piece of homework, and they would be like, "Oh, I didn't have time." And I'm used to saying, I'm used to doing 20 times the amount of homework in one evening.
Yeah.
So I think that it was a good decision to be in China during those years, especially up until the end of sort of Chinese junior school. And I came back to the UK when I was, like I said, when I was about 16, just after doing the Junko, the sort of junior school, or so the high school entrance exam, because I wanted to go to university in the UK, and you have to be living back in the country for at least 3 years to not be classed as an international student. So I came back to do A-levels, which is sort of the British equivalent of high school.
Right.
But I definitely think up until that point, it was a really good decision to study in China because, they work you hard, but you do pick up a lot of good study habits.
Right. So you did join the Junko, is it?
Yes, yeah, I did, yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. I haven't done that.
Really?
No, because I moved to Melbourne, Australia just after I graduated from year 9 in China. So
right. Okay.
I didn't get the chance to experience those, crazy exams.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you can just tell our audience a little bit about Junko. What is it?
So the Junko is an exam you do at the end of sort of your junior school, and it sort of determines which high school you're going to go into. And you do one in sort of every subject. Sort of the main subjects, English, Chinese, maths, usually are out of 150 because they're sort of the most important subjects. And you'll find the rest are out of sort of 100, say like physics and chemistry and history and politics. I'm sure I'm missing some out as well. I think there was PE as well, and geography and biology. Actually, the year I did it was the first year they had geography and biology in the Junko, at least in Guangdong province.
Right.
So that was fun, 2 extra exams. But so basically it's one exam at the end of 3 years of studying that has all the material that you've been studying for 3 years on it. And it's basically the only exam that matters to get you into high school.
That's right.
So there's a lot of pressure riding on it, definitely.
Yes.
Maybe not as much as the Gaokao, which is to get into university.
Yes.
But still a lot of pressure, especially considering you're younger and it's sort of the first time you've had to experience, something that has so much pressure on it. And sometimes you find that it's important to get into a good high school if you want to get good grades in the Gaokao and then go to a good university. So it all has a knock-on effect.
That's right.
But yeah, I found that you probably finished studying the material for all the 3 years after 2 years. And then the third year is all revision and doing mock exams and preparing for, the test. Which brings up another good point, actually, is that I found that a lot of my classmates back in the UK, when I was in high school here, got terrified of exams and they really didn't know sort of how to deal with the pressure of exams. But because in studying in China, I had so many yuekao, monthly exams.
Yeah, there's too many exams.
There's too many. There really is too many. But it definitely does give you that sort of etiquette on how to deal with exams. You know what to do, you know what to expect, and you know how to sit an exam. Which I feel is something that British students lack. And then you find they don't perform as well in exams because they just get worked up. But, when you do it every month for 3 years, you get used to them.
Yes. Yeah, I remember doing a lot of exam and tests, even more frequent than monthly, It was like even just fortnightly, every now and then we get a paper.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
It can be just a little test. It can be an exam. It can be more formal. It can be more casual, but, the point is we're getting tested all the time.
Exactly. Because at least in the school I was in, you had to do sort of official monthly exams were ones organized by the whole school would do them at the same time.
Yes.
And then you'd have like your position, like in your total scores in the school would be displayed outside the school.
Yep.
And the students who had the most improvement would have a ranking, and the students who did the best in certain subjects. And you'd sit usually on the Monday morning the next week after the flag raising ceremony. The headmistress would read out all the names of like the top 100 students. And
wow.
So that's something that's definitely also very different in the UK than from China, is that there's hardly any sort of competition. Grades are all completely secret. So they're all confidential. But no, in China they display them.
That's right.
And it's like an honor, or when your name is in like the top 100 or the top 10.
Yes.
For me, when I first moved down to Guangdong province, I found it a little hard adjusting to junior school life, just because it was a different environment. It was a new city, and junior school is a big jump from primary school. So I found it a little difficult adjusting in the beginning. So my grades generally weren't so good at the start. So I was always on the most improved list.
Right.
And you see it, and you've jumped 100 places in the school, and you're like, wow, that's pretty good. So it does make you want to do better.
Yep.
Then I suppose there are the counter arguments that if you do poorly and you get sort of shouted at or scolded for it, then maybe it would stop you from wanting to do better next time.
Yeah.
So I suppose there are pros and cons, but definitely I thought it was a good thing. A bit of healthy competition helps you.
Yes.
It gives you a bit more motivation, I feel.
Yes. The competition is huge in China. So just to give our audience a little bit of idea, basically, if you can't do well in your primary school, you probably can't get into a good middle school or high school. And then basically in China, there are two parts, right? Like one is the middle school, which is from year 7 to year 9. And at the end of year 9, you take a big exam that determines which high school you go to after that for year 10 to year 12. And then at year 12, you take the Gaokao, which is the entry exam to university. And that is the most crazy thing ever in the world. Just crazy.
Yeah, I definitely didn't want to experience that.
Yeah, no, that is just crazy. So that's why the competition is huge because of the population, and there's just a handful of very good, like prestigious universities, just only a handful of them. That's why everybody in China, every children in China are competing for those universities. So you can imagine the students who actually enter in those universities are really top, like the best of the best.
Yeah.
Really.
And when I was studying in Fudan last year, I met some exceptionally bright Chinese students.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Well, if you are to start learning Chinese from scratch all over again, how would you do it?
Oh, you asked some really good questions. It definitely makes, you're keeping me on my feet. And yeah, it's a good question. I think I would probably definitely still want to live in China. Mm-hmm. Having been away from China for a while and then gone back to study in Shanghai last year and seeing all these foreign students from around the globe who've only just started their sort of like Chinese language journey. It's such an experience. If you've never been to China before and you've moved to a new city, China has so much to offer. And I think living there is the best way to learn the language, learn the culture, and generally just get a feel for the place. And it really is astonishing.
Great. Great advice. Well, now, please share with us an embarrassing or a funny moment while you were learning Chinese.
Oh, okay. I remember my father and I were walking down the street, and quite often you'll hear somebody who spots you call you a lao wai,
right.
Which I suppose technically would mean like old foreigner, but you can. It doesn't have that sort of negative connotation, really.
Yeah.
At least I never thought of it that way. But then my dad started getting really angry thinking that somebody was calling him old. And I'm there just trying to explain, like, no, it's not actually literally meaning old. They would call me a lao wai even though I was only like 15.
Yeah.
It's just something that Chinese people say. So I suppose that's quite interesting, sort of a bit of a cultural difference there.
Yeah. Right. That's an interesting one. Yeah, definitely lao wai is... It really doesn't mean you're old.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Sometimes Chinese people call each other, lao something with a surname.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I used to explain it.
Yeah, so for example, a common surname is Wang, right? And then, when you're meeting your friend whose surname is Wang and you haven't seen each other for a long time, you say, hey, Lao Wang, it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
But not necessarily meaning you are old.
Exactly.
It brings the connection closer with the person.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting how the word lao wai originated.
Yeah.
But that is basically how Chinese people call a foreigner lao wai. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So anybody who goes to China and hears that now, you're going to know that they're not being rude to you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's another word which is 外国人, isn't it? So which is the proper word for foreigner.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
But, verbally people...
Yeah, it's a bit more blunt, I feel, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I felt like I liked lao wai more.
Yeah, it's closer. It feels just...
a bit more friendly.
Yeah. Well, now please share with us a success story, a most rewarding moment after you have become fluent in Chinese.
I think definitely for me, I know I mentioned it briefly, but it would be coming sort of second in the world in the Chinese proficiency competition, because there was 133 contestants from 97 countries. And that was just in the world final that took place in China, not to mention all the different heats in cities all around the UK. And it was definitely a very proud moment for me. And also because it gave me the chance to sort of mingle with all these people from different countries who had been on completely different and sometimes very similar journeys to me on how they learned Chinese. And it's really interesting hearing everybody's stories, because I suppose that's why you're never going to run out of people to interview, is because everybody has a different, method and a different story about how they learned Chinese and why they learned Chinese. And it really is fascinating hearing that. And it was a great honor. And like I said, being able to perform for President Xi Jinping after that, everything sort of snowballed after Chinese Bridge. So I think that definitely would be one of the most defining moments in my sort of Chinese language success story.
Yeah, definitely. Huge honor, like especially in China. I just feel that especially in China, being in such a huge country, with such huge population, and being able to meet the president, that is definitely something to be proud of.
Yeah, definitely.
In China, if you say, I've met President Xi Jinping, people will look up to you, like basically. Yeah. It's an achievement on its own, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was a great honor, and it was really nice. He was so friendly and very funny as well, So it was definitely a great honor, and it was a very interesting experience.
Yeah, great. So what are you doing with your Chinese now?
Now, at the moment, like I said, I've only just come back from Fudan University, where I was studying physics, also in Chinese.
Right.
So at the moment, I don't have any plans to return to China immediately, because I have 2 years left in Lancaster to finish off my master's degree. Although I am going to go back to the Confucius Institute here and see if they need my help with any sort of activities going on.
Yeah.
And I've also joined the CSSA, the Chinese Students and Scholars Association,
right,
which they have one in most UK universities. I don't know if it's the same in Australia. But yeah, so I'm joining them. I'm going to be hosting the Lancaster University Spring Festival show next year.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How would you compare your life before you've learned Chinese and your life after you have learned Chinese?
That's quite a difficult question, because, before it was when I was sort of 8. And
yeah, no.
I would say from when I left the UK to when I returned in those 8 years, I felt like a different person. I feel like learning Chinese and having had the satisfaction of going to a new country and having so many different experiences, and getting to understand a whole different culture. I feel like it opens your eyes to the world. I feel like some British people can be very sort of close-minded, not in like a rude way, but in sort of people will ask me questions about China that just it's like they don't know anything about it. And I just think it really does open your eyes on how different like all these places around the world can be. It definitely gave me a lot of confidence. I think that's why I like doing sort of like TV shows and presenting now. A big reason of that is because studying Chinese opened up all these different opportunities that you might not have had, definitely wouldn't have had if I was just stayed in Britain and hadn't learned the language. I feel like sort of as personal development and personal growth, it helped me to no end, definitely. And like I said as well, with the sort of study habits and methods of studying,
yes,
it definitely improved that as well. So yeah, I was not the same person coming back as when I left, and I definitely think I was sort of a better person, if not in the way that I was a horrible person before, but in the way that I was just more confident and better at studying and things like that. So an improved person, I suppose.
Definitely. You get the best of both worlds, I guess,
Exactly, yeah.
You can get all the great education, great mindset from UK, and also you learn the Chinese stuff and you get another perspective to things.
Exactly. Yeah, because, I feel like in China, especially in Chuzhong, in junior school, it's like we said before, there's lots of exams and things like that.
Yes.
But in the UK, you have like experiments and labs and presentations. And I feel like that's something that's very different. And to have a mix of both skills, so sort of like hands-on presentation, group activity skills, and the ability to be able to be sort of an individual student and be able to study and read on your own and take exams. I feel like you need to have sort of a mix of both to be the best, to be able to achieve the best you can.
Yes. Now, please share with us one special thing about the Chinese culture that is different to your own culture.
When I was living in China, I really liked studying 国画,
right?
Sort of like Chinese painting. So not calligraphy, because, that's with writing, 书法, that's with writing characters. but actually the painting side of it. And I feel like I remember that my teacher always used to say, oh, it's not the same as, Western oil paintings. With Chinese traditional painting, you'll find that it's just as important to not have any paint somewhere as it is to have paint somewhere, because it's always sort of symbolizing the yin and the yang and the you and the wu, because you want to have, in a good guohua, Chinese traditional painting, it's not like an oil painting where sort of every piece of canvas should have color on it. You want to leave blank spaces where there should be blank spaces, and you want to have paint where there should be paint, and it should be sort of a balance. I felt that's something that's very different, at least from an artistic point of view.
Right. You're still learning that?
I haven't sort of learnt it since I've been back, but I spent the year doing it in Shanghai last year as well.
Right.
Carrying on I hadn't done it for a long time, and I picked it up again, and I remembered how much I loved it. So I actually brought some paints and brushes back with me from China. So
right.
Hopefully in the holidays, I'll get the chance to bring them out and sort of do a bit more.
Cool. What's your favorite city in China?
That's very hard. I enjoyed living in Shanghai a lot, I must say, because it's such a big city, and you can go to sort of gigantic shopping malls, and you can go to theme parks, or you could go to a tiny little temple. I just felt like it had everything. It's a good display of China, because there are still the tranquil parks where people are doing Tai Chi, but then on the other side, there's like the huge sort of financial district, which is like showing like China's sort of view towards the future and the growth that China's going through. So I feel like that's good. But Beijing definitely as well, for the historical side of things, it is a fantastic city. It's like a living museum, walking through the streets of Beijing. You go through some of the hutongs, or you can go to the Forbidden City or go to Tiananmen Square, and you just feel like the feeling of China. Like you feel all of that history walking through sort of the palaces in the Forbidden City. So very different cities, Beijing and Shanghai.
Yes.
It's very difficult for me to choose which one I like more.
Right, but definitely one of those two.
Definitely one of those two, I would say, yeah.
Cool.
Although you make me think about it, and I loved Hangzhou. That's such a beautiful city. You have the West Lake, and you have the Lingying Temple, and it's the whole of China is just fantastic. You make me think about it now, and I also enjoyed going to Huangshan.
Yes.
And I definitely, out of all the places I've been, as far as natural beauty goes, it just blew me away. Absolutely stunning. If anybody who's listening goes to China, Huangshan, Yellow Mountain in Anhui province, definitely a must-see if you like sort of nature.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of beautiful nature scenery in China. Very, very different to the Western world.
Yes. Everywhere.
Well, is there a tool, an app, or a website that you cannot live without in learning Chinese?
I use Pleco all the time.
Right. Cool.
And after living in Shanghai for that year, most, if not all, of the foreign students studying Chinese, they all use it, because it's just such a good app. You can use it to. Now they have the function where you can sort of take a picture of something and it'll translate it for you. I find that I don't have to use it as much anymore. But a lot of people who are just starting out with Chinese, I know, find it really invaluable, because they have like a flashcards setting where you can practice your writing or practice your reading and retention. It's just an all-round fantastic app, and I would suggest it to anybody learning Chinese.
Yeah, it's our most frequently mentioned app in our show.
Yeah, I'm sure,
Yeah.
Because and rightly so.
Yes. If you are to recommend to our listeners one book in learning Chinese or the Chinese culture, what would that be?
So I didn't really learn Chinese from a specific sort of book written for foreigners, because I lived in China from primary school age and studied in a primary school. So I would suggest, if you really want to try, it might be a bit difficult in the beginning, but like I said, with apps like Pleco, it would be a lot easier. Pick up a sort of primary school year one textbook and start from there,
right,
and try to read through, 一年级, and then start from year one and go up from primary school. And I think if you're at an intermediate Chinese level, start from like 初中, because there are some very interesting texts, and you'll find that a yuan, like a Chinese school Chinese textbook, it has such a large variety of different writing styles, different techniques. It'll have poems, it'll have wenyanwen, like ancient Chinese texts, and it'll have sort of famous excerpts from famous Chinese authors. So I definitely would suggest sort of Chinese textbooks for Chinese students, because it'll give you a variety of things to look at, and it'll definitely be very interesting, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That'll be interesting, because all the Chinese actually learn those materials. So definitely very relevant to people's life. And
exactly,
people often use phrases and words coming out of those Chinese texts. And basically, I remember like in China at school, what students learn in school are those very famous Chinese poems, ancient texts and all that. So
exactly, yeah.
Very, very famous, very, very important, with very significant cultural background to it.
Yeah.
So definitely recommend it.
Yeah, and you'll find that if any of the listeners, when they go to China, it is really often that people will quote, a line from a poem or a chengyu. Chengyus, the idioms, they're so important, and everyone sort of has like its origin story. And a lot Chinese textbooks generally, will tell you a lot about chengyus as well. And if you can add those into your sort of everyday life speaking and definitely writing, it'll improve sort of your Chinese writing skill to no end. Because, if you can use chengyus appropriately, I think it's something that people learning Chinese find quite difficult, myself included. But it is definitely very impressive, because everyone has its own meaning and also like special usage. And you'll find that there's a time where you can use it and it'll just be perfect.
Yes. Very precise, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like a picture. It says everything you need to say in a very, small amount of space.
That's true. Well, now this is your chance to teach our listeners your favorite Chinese quote, phrase, or expression.
Yeah. Okay. So my favorite Chinese sort of phrase or expression is 一路顺风.
一路顺风, yep.
Which means sort of safe travels. But, if you literally translate it, it means, I wish you the entirety of your journey, your road or route will be in the direction of the flow of the wind. And I just feel like it's such a beautiful way to put it. Quite often in Chinese, you hear this, say, like with the Chinese word for or phrase for hitchhiking is 搭顺风车, take a car that's going in the direction that the wind's blowing. And I just feel like it's, and, 一路顺风 is definitely a very commonly used phrase, so it's useful to know. But also, you find Chinese is so beautiful when you sort of try to actually think about what these phrases mean. It's just such a really nice way of putting it.
Yes, people use this a lot. When you travel somewhere, when you travel to another city, take a car ride somewhere, people will just say 一路顺风.
Yeah, exactly.
Which kind of saying, we wish you a good journey, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's useful and it's very nice.
Yeah, but one thing I did hear about, when I was young, I'm not sure this is true, is that people saying if you're taking an airplane ride, you probably don't want the airplane to be flying in the same direction of the wind. That way you may just go down. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, you say this, but I've heard the exact same thing. And actually, not that long ago, I think maybe 2 years ago, I said it to the director of the Confucius Institute in Lancaster.
Right.
And she was like, oh, you shouldn't say that when somebody's taking an airplane.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, really? And she said exactly the same thing that you just said. So that's actually a very good thing to bring up. Don't say it if they're going on a plane.
Exactly. I just be, around the side of caution.
Exactly.
I never say that when people are taking an airplane ride. But any other situation, you can say that.
I would assume it originates from sort of like sailing and boats.
Yes.
Because, you definitely want to be in the direction of the wind if you're sort of on a boat.
That's right. That's exactly right. I'm pretty sure that's how it was originated. And that was how it meant to be. 一路顺风 means people sailing.
Yeah.
Well, great. So if you are to give our listeners one single piece of parting advice in learning Chinese, what would that be?
So my parting advice to all the listeners would be never give up and don't stop practicing. Speak as much as you can and find, Chinese friends, find a Chinese pen pal, go to China and just speak it as much as you can, because the more you use it, technically the more you'll get it wrong, but the more you'll be corrected and the more you'll learn.
Fantastic advice. Well, just before we let you go, Cameron, how can our listeners reach you?
So everybody can follow me on Weibo if they'd like.
Mm-hmm.
My username is Kangke57, Kangke 57. Yeah, and I'd definitely love to hear from them. If anybody has some sort of questions on sort of my story, and if they want some tips on picking up Chinese, then yeah, feel free to leave me a comment or send me a message. I'll be happy to reply.
Great. I'll link that in the show note.
Great.
Well, thank you so much, Cameron, for being in our show today. It's a pleasure to talk to you about your journey, and it's a very interesting journey, and you share with our listeners a lot about the Chinese culture, especially in the education system. That's very interesting. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it's been an absolute pleasure, Victor. Thank you so much for being such a good interviewer.
To our listeners, the show note is now available at ChineseTalkEase.com/25. TalkEase is spelled as Talkeze. Do you want to learn Chinese for free? Start your own journey to Chinese fluency with my video lessons at ChineseTalkEase.com. TalkEase is spelled as Talkeze. Also remember to join our Facebook group. Just head over to TalkChineseCommunity.com. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on iTunes. Each month, I will choose one reviewer and give out a 1-year subscription to all my premium video lessons for free. That's it for now. I'll see you in the next episode.